Oh, g'day everyone, and welcome to the final edition of Weekend Wrap for 2021, the grand final edition, of course. It's been run and won by the Demons in a pretty good game of footy, even though it was a blowout at the end. So to talk all about it, let's get started, shall we? G'day everyone, and welcome to the grand final edition of the Weekend Wrap, brought to you by Crowcast, of course. Great to see everyone along in Discord and also on YouTube. Don't forget, if you want to get around the chat tonight, there'll be a bit of space for that, so get your hand up in the live studio audience on Discord, and we'd be happy to have you on board. And joining me for our last edition for 2021, Nikki, how are you?
I'm here. I can't believe we've made it through a full year.
I know, amazing.
This year.
Amazing, right? And Macca, how you going, Mac?
Oh, flying high as usual, mate. In good form.
He's had some chicken, chef. He's all good.
It sounds like it's a good thing that this is the last one, because you guys are just sort of crawling to the line, are you?
No, I am in good shape. Nicky's half dying, apparently.
Apparently, yeah.
Yeah,
we did run through some medical issues prior to the cast going live. Apologies for that, those that were listening in the studio audience.
Bloody viruses.
I thought you covered about half of the medical known illnesses.
Nah, there's way more than that.
Look, as I said, thanks to everyone who's joined us on Discord and also on YouTube. Plenty of room for a chat tonight, so don't be shy. Get amongst it on Discord if you want to share your thoughts with us. And speaking of sharing thoughts, grand final run and won, and my not my tip, but my favoured team got up in the end. A pretty powerful display, Macca.
Yeah, very powerful display. It was actually a strange game in some ways, because it was a game of massive major momentum swings, not like little ones. And, you know, when the game started in the first quarter, you thought, well, Melbourne are just going to kick the Bulldogs off the park. Bulldogs respond in the second quarter, and then after half time, you think early in the piece that they're going to get Melbourne are going downhill. They're definitely going to go under. They're about 5 or 6 goals down.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, Melbourne really got going, and wasn't it something like 16 goals to 1 thereafter? And it's just an unbelievable finish by Melbourne. And they were so good. And look, they are very, very deserved premiers. They had a very, very good year. I just have to say, the Crows, of course, we did beat them. But you know, outstanding year for Melbourne, and I think very well deserved premiers.
Yeah, I think so too. What do you reckon, Nick?
Well, for me, up until I think the last 2 minutes of the third quarter, that was the grand final I was really looking forward to, and we got it. You know, as I'd said, you know, these are the two most attacking sides really in the competition, and that's what we got. And as Macca was right, those massive swings back and forth. And I think if they hadn't have got those last couple of goals in like the last minute or 2 minutes, I think the last quarter might have been slightly different, but I think that just broke the Bulldogs. And then when they kicked that first one, it was just like floodgates open, and I was like, okay, I'm bored in this last quarter. Great for the Melbourne fans.
3 goals in the last 50 seconds of that third quarter. It was just some of the best centre clearance work you'd ever see. And we'll go into more detail. Let's not waste our bullets too early. Obviously, the only game to review this week is the grand final, of course. So why don't we just get straight into it? Melbourne 21-14, 140, beating the Dogs in the end by 74 points, if you don't mind, 10-6, 66. As we mentioned, massive momentum swings during the game, but Melbourne, when it mattered, and they've been the best third quarter team all season, and boy, did they turn it on after half time. It was an incredibly powerful performance, and for mine, there are a few people, a few players, I should say, on the Melbourne side that just gave you the impression that there was no way that they were going to lose that game without a big fight. And after half time, they just stepped it up, and the Bulldogs could not go with them.
I think it was very interesting watching them warm up out on the ground and when they were standing there. And even that vision from the room and the big smiles on the faces and the congratulations on the Bulldogs players, even before the game started, I was like, you guys are in a bit of trouble here. And they were in that first quarter. And to me, it reminded me very much of the Crows women's, that they seemed to have played their grand final the week before, and they just kind of thought it was going to happen, not understanding that, a grand final, you've really got to step it up. And Melbourne showed that they did that in the first quarter, and they missed some goals they bloody shouldn't have. So, and I think if they'd made those, I don't think we would have got the Bulldogs back in the game. The Bulldogs then managed to remember how to play football in the second quarter. But you're right, they were just so powerful in that last half of the third quarter and then into the last.
You mentioned that second quarter there, Nikki. That was an interesting quarter. That was just Bont at his very, very best, Bontempelli.
Yes.
It was a man taking the whole game by the scruff of his neck and saying, "We are going to win this bloody game." And he was outstanding in that quarter. I'm thinking going into the break at half time, this is Bont's medal to win. Probably even if they lose. But I got to say, after half time, hats off to Oliver. He actually manned up on Bont and kept him to a moderate second half while playing a very good second half himself. And he would have been a pretty good candidate for the medal if it hadn't been for some Greek named bloke called Petrarca, who absolutely played an absolute belter. And if you have a look at his stats quarter by quarter, Petrarca, he was just good every quarter. But, some quality stuff came out in the second half.
I think you missed a couple of unsung heroes for the Bulldogs in that second quarter. One was Adam Treloar. I thought he played a really good first half in general, and his second quarter, getting on the end of it twice and picking up a few touches, I thought he was good. The other one that I thought was a real driver for the Bulldogs was Liberatore.
Correct.
He started getting his hands on the ball first, and he's a real catalyst for them. And I thought he was the driver. Bontempelli certainly was powerful and got a lot of it, and really put the team on his shoulders. But I actually felt it started with Liberatore in the middle, Mac, to be honest, in that second quarter.
Oh, no, full credit. And it's one of those things, isn't it, that the guy that does all the hard work doesn't get a lot of the credit. Some of the Bont stuff was...
That's how I feel about this podcast, mate.
Well,
yeah, but we give you the credit, so shush.
I wasn't talking about me. I was talking about you guys.
Okay. No, we don't do any hard work.
I nearly swore then. We do, you're quite right though. He is. Tend to think of him as Liberace instead of Liberatore. No, he really is a key to them going well, isn't he? Because he does get the very, very hard ball and somehow finds a body to give it to. And if it doesn't, if it's not really the right one, they move it around very quickly anyhow and get it out. The Bont, I suppose the Bont looked very spectacular because he did get some of those from Liberatore or from others via Liberatore. But, he did look powerful in that second quarter. And that's what really catches the eye, I suppose. But you're quite right. There's a lot of other people that go into making a quarter successful. Treloar's 2 goals they were about 2 goals in 2 minutes, I reckon.
Yeah, about that.
Yeah, he got those first two, and they were. That's what they weren't doing in the first quarter. They were waiting for the ball to come to them, and they were tapping it down. They were doing the right things in their forward line when they were getting in there in the first quarter, but they were then waiting back too much and waiting for the ball to come to them instead of leading in. Whereas those two goals from Tlor were him at the feet of the contest, getting it and then just putting it on his boot. And he does know where the goals are. Just on your Liberatore point, Fiend, I thought it was very interesting because you kind of started to see him go missing about halfway through that third quarter.
Yeah.
And that's when that Bulldogs got the run. And then in the last quarter, he just didn't have anything at all.
Something else happened. Something else happened halfway through that third quarter, and that was that Jackson went into ruck and absolutely turned the centre bounce attendances on their head. And if you'll notice, if you have a chance to look at some replays or whatever, the way that Melbourne moved the ball out of the middle is that they just push the ball forward. And if you notice, Oliver and Petrarca instinctively move the ball to the offensive end of the pack, knowing that one of their players is going to be there. They are always running forward. And as soon as Jackson got on top and they were able to get a little bit of first service, the first movement was always forward. And I distinctly recall at least two of those last three goals in the minute before three-quarter time. Both times it was just the ball shuffled to the front of the pack. Someone would run on and then there'd be a chain of handballs. And the one that Oliver kicked the goal in particular was exactly that, just moving the ball forward. And it was pointed out on one of the shows, might have even been this morning, that at no stage did the Bulldogs look to hang a man back on that defensive side. Liberatore was playing on that defensive side, and he kept getting sucked into the ball, sucked into the contest, and leaving all that space behind. And Melbourne, because they were actually able to get first use, they were just putting the ball into that space and running onto it. And it was just unstoppable.
That's a very, very astute comment. The whole thing started with Luke Jackson, as you say, because I've got that comment written down here to say.
Sorry, mate.
And you've done it all. And no, you've done it all, and you're 100% right. And particularly in that little burst of the quick three goals, were exactly as you described it. Just players running ahead, they're expecting the ball to come there. It was interesting that the Bulldog side, they obviously can read Gawn a lot better, but they had no idea how to read Luke Jackson. No idea whatsoever. And he was just put. And
they
to have
had
a second
plan for Gawn, didn't they?
They did. They had it absolutely planned for Gawn. And Luke Jackson, to have a second ruck of his quality, they've got a pretty astute selection team there, people who draft, because to get him, they took him pretty early, and a lot of people thought, gee, that's too high for him.
It was a bit of a reach, yeah.
And they thought the same about Pickett as well. And, again, the Melbourne have been proved right and the critics have been proven wrong. But you're quite right about that. That was a very, very big factor in the whole thing.
Yeah. The other one that I thought was instrumental in that third quarter that really epitomised that feeling that I got watching the game, that the Melbourne boys had just kind of steeled themselves and thought, nah, we're not going to roll over, was Gus Brayshaw on a wing. I thought he was outstanding. Some of the efforts that he put in and some of the hits that he took and some of the hits that he dished out, I just thought he was an extreme catalyst for them on the outside, and really set a bit of a tone for them in terms of, saying to his teammates, come on, we're not out of this yet. We've just got to keep doing what we're doing. And I thought his game was outstanding as well, and a bit unsung.
Well, I haven't seen him play a game like that, I reckon, for about 2 or 3 years. I think it was about 3 years ago he had a very good season, and I think he's been reasonably moderate in recent times. But, I thought he played an excellent game, a really excellent game, and by his own standards, a very courageous game.
Yeah. And, he spoke this morning about having a role change in the last year or so, going from an inside mid to an outside player, and having to sacrifice a little bit of his own game for the betterment of the team. And, I just felt like his courage and his commitment to the contest was was excellent when it needed to be, and a lot of Melbourne players were excellent when they needed to be. And whereas the Bulldogs players, as soon as they were challenged, I've always thought this about the Western Bulldogs and teams coached by Beveridge, is that they run very high on emotion, and when they get a bit of forward momentum, they run really high, but they're quite susceptible to momentum changes, and they tend to. I noticed them drop their heads quite early in the last quarter, and they started not chasing, and they really I mean, I know that Melbourne really poured it on, but they didn't offer any resistance once that momentum swing occurred, and I think it's down to how the two teams prepared, and I do think that the Bulldogs are susceptible to holding them up and actually meeting them front on, which is what happened in the first quarter when Melbourne just applied that extreme pressure. And it happened again in the third quarter when Melbourne got on top in the middle and they started to break even on contests around the ground. The Bulldogs, all of a sudden, you could almost feel them say, oh, hang on a minute, it's not going to be as easy as what we thought after we got in front.
Yeah, well, I think progressively, of course, as the margin blew out, I thought the efforts by the Bulldogs got lesser and lesser. There's no doubt about that. I think in grand finals, there is that susceptibility to that. When you're in a situation, it's okay if you're 2 or 3 goals down and, you're scratching it out and you're still in there. But when there's this momentum swing like Melbourne had, and it was just like a steam train running over with a man trying to stop it, and no chance. And that looked like the Bulldogs was starting mentally to think that actually supports what you said. And I think their efforts, they would have thought they were trying 100%, but they looked like they were going about 80%.
Yeah. And, a lot of credit, Nick, has gone to a guy who reportedly will be in charge of our strength and fitness next year, in Mr. Burgess. And there's been more than a few nods to him in post-match reports, and the players themselves as well credit him with making them feel fit and strong. And if he does end up coming to the LA Crows, as the report suggests, due to family reasons, massive boost to our club as we rebuild.
Caroline Wilson said it's absolutely a done deal. It was done. She said it was done back in March. There was a
Matt. I threw to Nicky then because you were dominating as usual out of the midfield, and I wanted Nick to get a little bit of outside ball. I'd just given her a nice little handball out of the pack, Andrew Jarman style.
And he's just run through and nicked it.
Nicky, go ahead. Go ahead, Nicky. I'll just put Macca on virtual mute.
Here we go.
Oh, now you've upset Scoot.
Oh, Scoot's very sensitive. It's all in good fun, mate. Relax.
No, I don't want to count our chickens before they're hatched, but there's been those rumours for a very long time about Burgess coming back, and that's the one thing that we've really kind of talked about where we're lacking, is that extra bit of that fitness and that hardness that we need, and what's kind of taken away from previous years where we've had some good players, etc., and things like this. So, I mean, if it is true, fingers, toes, legs, arms crossed, absolutely massive.
That'd be good for you, Nick, over the last couple of weeks.
We'll leave that there.
Now we've just done it. Nick's just done a Jake Kelly sideways kick to you, Matt. Go.
What I was going to say is that Caroline Wilson said that it has been 100% done. It's that there was a deed of understanding signed in March, and that the family's over here already, and that she's saying it's 100% done, and Burgess will be with the Crows next year.
Well, it's for family reasons. His children are over here. I'm not sure about the underlying situation there, but we don't need to know. Melbourne came out very early in the piece this year and said that they support him in whatever he ends up having to do, and if that means coming back to South Australia for family reasons, then they'll be supportive of that. And I think that's probably the biggest indicator in my book that he's on his way. We didn't replace Nick Haas with anybody. Port have already filled their books in terms of their high performance manager, so I'd be extremely surprised if he doesn't come across. And one of the things that really has struck me this year about Christian Petrarca, but it struck me again even with I don't know whether you remember his first goal of the night. His ability off 1 foot to just absolutely power his leg through the ball with no momentum and kick the ball 50 metres is amazing. His lower body strength and his core strength is so impressive. And there's a few of them, like Clayton Oliver's a bit slighter, but he still has that core strength and that ability to move through traffic and not get moved off the ball. And I think that's a key element that we've been missing in our own midfield, which allows us not to get separation and to actually be constructive out of contest. So I can't say highly enough of how much I'm looking forward to seeing Burgess work with our young lads.
You talk about core strength, and Oliver, I can remember one clearance that he got there where the ball had been tapped to him, and he was being held by two players. I don't know how he got the ball down onto his foot and kicked it forward.
Yeah,
that was
I remember
just an amazing clearance. Amazing clearance, and as you say, it's just sheer core body strength.
It is, yep. All right, well, let's look through some team stats, shall we? Because that's what we do, isn't it? That's what we do. And it was reasonably even. 366 disposals to 379 in the Dogs' favour. Both kick-to-handball ratios pretty similar. But inside 50s, look at the difference there. 64 to 49. One of the things that Petrarca said was quite interesting after, I think it might have also been this morning, that in that second quarter they got too careful, and and I guess that's a bit of a danger when you've built up such a lead so early in a game. You almost go into protection mode, and they did go into their shells in the second quarter. They weren't as dynamic, Melbourne, and that allowed Bulldogs, who also have an impressive midfield, to take control. And that was the difference when Melbourne switched back on in the third, that they kind of threw caution to the wind a bit and got attacking again. But certainly through that second quarter, they, by their own admission, were a bit cautious. But when you look at that inside 50 count, Macca and Nicky, off similar disposal counts, you just understand how direct and how effective Melbourne were with ball in hand. Also, efficiency inside 50, 35 shots from 64 inside 50s. The Bulldogs only had 17 shots at goal from 49 inside 50s. So the Bulldogs, I don't know how it looked to you guys, but the Bulldogs' entries for mine didn't look anywhere near as polished or direct. They couldn't use Norton. Shashi, after a decent start, sort of fell out of the game. English didn't really have much of an impact. They didn't really seem to have any direct avenues to goal apart from Bontempelli when he was down there.
Well, that's 100% right. And the ball wasn't being, in the main, delivered lace out to the players as well. If you look down the other end, you had Fritz in particular was getting some very nice kicks given to passes given to him.
Yep.
And he had the distraction of Big Ben Brown, who was an unwanted at North Melbourne, not wanted at all, and yet here he is. He's been a premiership player. Having the contrast of those two, one huge and tall and does like a leader himself, and Fritz, who's a very strong mark for a guy his size, but very good on the lead as well, and a beautiful kick for goal. It just worked out to be. In fact, they were so good, they didn't leave many crumbs for the little fellas, did they?
No, because I was fairly quiet, although defensively worked really hard. But the thing I like about Fritsch and that whole situation is the amount of times they put the ball to his advantage. Some of the kicks to Bailey Fritsch were outstanding because they basically gave his defender no chance. I think at one stage, in the final quarter, Easton Wood was on Fritsch and he didn't have a chance because they were just putting it in the perfect spot to him every time.
Oh, absolutely.
Good on you, Nick. Nick's just chopped out.
Go, Nikki.
No, I was just gonna say it's very interesting that they refer to him as like a mid-sized forward, but I think the way he plays as a tall forward. He's got very long arms. So even if he doesn't have the physical height, those like Ben Brown, those are his arm length actually makes it quite hard for defenders to play against him. And yeah, and you're spot on with the way those deliveries were coming in. The Bulldogs were very crow-like in that they were trying to bomb it in too deep, and it was like, did you guys forget everything that you learnt how you played against Port in the prelim to get away from Lear, that you have to bring it in closer? And they just couldn't do it. And I thought it was very telling, actually, Caleb Daniels, like his first couple of possessions, kicking into the man in the mark or, keeping another man, turnovers, everything else. They just did not cope with that pressure that goes up an absolute notch in a grand final.
Yeah. And even when they got on top in the second quarter, it was really on the back of some good crumbing, and it wasn't their key forwards that got them back in the game by any stretch. And I felt like they didn't exploit Norton well enough. They allowed him to tussle with May pretty much all night. Jakey Lever didn't have a big impact on the game, but they didn't really seem to want to drop the eyes too much and offer up those shorter hit-ups. They were happy to, as you say, Nicky, just chuck it in deep and hope for the best. And, Stephen May, a credit again to Burgess. I don't know how many people read the report that May played with a 6 centimetre tear in his hamstring, which...
Or he was not bending over.
With the first... I'll leave that one there, Nick. With the medical guys at Melbourne basically working with him every day for 2 weeks to make sure that he could play. But he was pretty solid against the Bulldogs forwards, and credit to him, Lever, and the rest of the defenders down there for keeping Norton quiet, because, as we know, Norton can turn the game on his head very quickly.
I didn't think the Bulldogs had a very good forward structure at all, though, Fina. Like, when they played against Port Adelaide, there was a very, very deliberate structure where two forwards would stay together, one to block Lear, and the other one to be the marking forward. I couldn't work out what they were trying to achieve up forward, because they firstly didn't set up as in any fashion that looked like it was going to be a winner. And then secondly, the ball just bobbed in there just far too often.
Yeah. A couple of things out of the chat. Bobby Brady reckons it finally looked like he was out of his depth. I didn't think so at all. I thought he was very good. Jack Finey. The other one, Vardy asking whether the Dogs just ran out of gas. Look, it kind of looked that way, but they had a 2-week break. They should have been as fresh as they were ever going to be, and under normal circumstances, the team outside of the top 4 does struggle in that situation because they have played the extra game. But I don't know whether they can actually point to that as any sort of reason under the circumstances of this year. It looked to me, as I said, like the emotion ran dry and they had nothing left.
Well, they can't use fitness as any excuse, man, because they did it very, very hard for 3 weeks, and on the 3rd week, they absolutely obliterated Port Adelaide. And then, as you said, then they've had a week to rest, to refresh themselves.
Yeah.
So they should have felt very good about themselves. They've won 3 in a row. They've been tough. They've been hard. They've done it well, and we're getting better with each game. And you would have thought that, and you actually tipped them on that basis. So the fact that you thought they'd be primed, and that was a very reasonable thought that they'd be primed for the grand final.
Yeah.
The Scribes were a little bit worried about Melbourne, that they'd only played 1 game in 4 weeks, and this is they might not be match hardened enough. But it turned out to be absolutely the opposite. But so that Bulldogs can't use fitness as an excuse, and they can't use the fact they played 3 weeks in a row as an excuse. They did have the week off. It just was a simple case that Melbourne were too good.
Yeah, and I think that's why I'd sort of reached the conclusion about the Bulldogs running on emotion, because I feel like that's the way Beveridge coaches. He likes to build up that us versus them mentality, and he likes to have them backs to the wall and all that sort of stuff, and it's all very well and good when things are falling your way, but I feel like Melbourne were more focused on trusting their own abilities and trusting each other's abilities. Goodwin and his team have developed a very selfless kind of culture down there now, where they play for each other and they take, they celebrate each other's victories and whatnot. And I just feel like the relaxed attitude that Simon Goodwin took to them stood them in good stead to not drop their heads when things were going bad, and to remain confident in their ability to come back. Whereas when the Bulldogs were headed, I feel like that sucked them of any emotion that they would have needed to make any sort of final quarter comeback.
And you're right there about the way that Melbourne play that team structure, and the way that he's had that. So when he takes players off, he's putting players of almost equal quality on in those positions, so that they're not losing anything. And I think that's where the Bulldogs have fallen down, is because they play on that emotion. And yes, they've got some great players and everything else, but they've also got some ones that are very up and down. And that just didn't work for them. I mean, that first quarter, they just completely forgot how to play football. He obviously gave it to them at quarter time, because they came out and was like, no, this is how we play football. You always knew Melbourne were going to challenge them a little bit in the third. They kind of got a bit of momentum. Melbourne kind of hung around, and then they just went bang, 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 bang. And it just broke the Bulldogs. And it's because they do play on that emotion more than they play on their structure.
Yeah.
That I think that's entirely where it came down to.
That's what I think, Nick. Stoppages, probably where the game was won and lost in the end. Hit-outs 47-30 in Melbourne's favour. Clearances 44-33 in Melbourne's way, including 19-11 in the centre and 25-22 around ground. I don't think I've ever seen so many goals kicked directly from centre clearances, not just in a grand final, but any bloody game. It was just insane, the efficiency and the way they were able to break clear through the middle there. So, and that solves. I mean, imagine having 3 goals kicked against you in a grand final in 50 seconds when you've been leading, 10 minutes ago quite comfortably, and thinking maybe we're a chance here. Possessions, contested possessions 152, 149, uncontested 213 to 227. Turnovers relatively even. You can see the respective heat maps there. Melbourne dominant in the middle of the ground. The Bulldogs sort of pushing from half back a little bit more. What have we got? Aerially, surprisingly, the Bulldogs 76-68, but it was marks inside 50 that mattered. 17-4, you guys, 17-4. And when you're talking about, Shaki and Norton and English up there, that just shows how well the Melbourne defence countered their tools, but also how haphazard and disorganised the Bulldogs were coming forward. And I put that down. Macca, you made a comparison with the Port game previously. I don't think Port were able to apply as much pressure to the Bulldogs midfield as what Melbourne were able to do when the Bulldogs had the ball. And I think that contributed heavily to the quality of their forward 50 entries.
There's no doubt you're 100% right on that, Fiend. Yeah, Port didn't put very much pressure at all on Melbourne's midfield. So, sorry, on the Dogs' midfield that particular game. And that's one of the reasons why they got so blistered. I think, there's no doubt to win these big finals, you have to win the midfield. There's no doubt about that.
Yep. Any other stats of any interest? Tackles are fairly equal. Tackles inside 50 were won by the Bulldogs, but probably because the ball was down there a little bit more often. 1% is fairly even. So really, the game, according to the stats, and probably according to the eye test as well, was one out of the middle. A lot of chatter about the value of ruckman. And you could say that you can probably win with an average ruckman, and a couple of teams, premiership teams, of years past haven't had what you would call premier ruckman, but I've never seen a team win a grand final with a poorly performed ruckman. Have either of you guys?
No, that's a very good point.
No.
Because that comes back to starting in the middle, doesn't it? And game starts there in the middle, and if you've got it going your way all the time, well, you're eventually going to win the game.
Yep.
Just one point I'd like to raise, though, Fiend. Simon Goodwin. He was on the at the beginning of the season when the so-called scribes choose or state who they think are the coaches most under fire and likely to go even during the season. His name is high up there, and it just goes to show that it's not necessarily always the coach's fault. The Goodwin is Goodwin. He's the same Goodwin, and yet last year they're talking about he'd be very lucky if he makes it through this season, and the guy's a premiership coach.
I was thinking about that a little bit today, Macca, because we're very quick to judge. We're very quick to judge players. We're very quick to judge coaches, and judgment and critical analysis has its place in football as it does with any sport. And, it wasn't so long ago that critical analysis told you that there was something particularly wrong with the Adelaide Crows. And, we've seen the turnaround in our club since that analysis has taken place. Pretty much that whole crew has been cleared out and things are looking a lot brighter. But it's interesting, you look at a team like Carlton who have gone through coaches like Nicky's gone through boyfriends recently. And... for no gain. Richmond stuck with Hardwick when he was on the nose in the first couple of years of his tenure. There's a lot to be said for the influence that the media has had on clubs' decisions, and I just wonder whether all of us, whether when it comes to analysing new players or analysing coaches or stuff like that, we all need to just maybe take a bit of a breath and just allow young kids to develop and coaches to get all the pieces in place that they need to, etc., etc. And that's different to maybe looking at a Chris Scott or a Ken Hinkley who've probably had enough time, and you start to think, well, all right, maybe that's not going to work for them. But, it wasn't so long ago that Melbourne were being canned for another bust in Christian Petrarca as a top-end pick. And as you rightly point out, Goodwin was on the nose with a lot of the media for not being able to coach. And here we are with Petrarca, Norm Smith medalist, and Simon Goodwin, a premiership-winning coach. So I think the media have got a lot to answer for in terms of getting on the backs of coaches and players really early, and maybe in some cases clubs that aren't strong enough to withstand that and are slaves to court of public opinion maybe have cost themselves a few chances as a consequence.
Yep, I would say that would have happened to many a coach over the years that really didn't have the team, let down perhaps by the list management team, and yet he's the one that takes the blame and when and he gets the boot. So in this case, just as I said, I think you're quite right. I think we do judge very quickly. It's a pressure industry, there's no doubt about that, and it's going to be judged a lot quicker and faster than anything else, but I think we do it a little bit too quickly.
Yeah, well, I guess, and Nick, you'd probably agree, Chase Jones is a classic point from our point of view, absolutely written off by all and sundry, including us.
And including me, watching him play in defence in the SNFL. I still wasn't happy when he got put in the AFL team. And I'm like, oh, this could be disastrous. But he just seemed to take that little bit of a step up. But that's something we've talked about this, I think, a couple of years ago, particularly around Hutchinson, etc., and how he's kind of created his little empire, because his empire is purely based on the fact of you have to get a story out. He doesn't actually they don't seem to particularly care whether it's true or not.
Yep.
They just want that story, and they've got to keep funneling them out over and over again. And it's not just in our sport; it's across all sport. It's across all news areas. Unfortunately, it's something that we're having to deal with. But I think what we've kind of done on this podcast is we do tend to look at the longer picture.
Well,
And
not always, Nick, but we try. I guess
yeah,
we
not
try to be
always.
objective.
Yeah, we try to be objective, and we look at it. And I think it was interesting that I think the calls were mostly from us predominantly about looking at our own club and saying there's an issue going on here. But that was because you could just see that pattern happen
Yeah.
so many times. And you're so right about a lot of the calls on coaches, because they're coming from people who either haven't coached, haven't played, and that does give you a little bit of an insight. But then you do get people who have played, like Kane Corns, who has he ever got any any of his
No.
calls actually right? So it's that you've got to be that balance, but you need to be able to have that brain to be able to observe and think and take the step back and try and take the emotion out of it a little bit, which is very hard to do as fans.
Well,
Um,
I'll put it to you.
Always
Sorry, go, Mac.
I was going to say we will always have some emotion because we are fans, Nikki.
Yeah.
But you say take it out. Well, you will never for 100% take it out because that's
No.
just who we are. And I notice at the moment they're mentioning Mackesy in the chat. Well, this is a case where he's been with us a couple of years, and I really, I'm judging him now. I'm judging him because he's had 2 years and I'm not liking what I'm seeing. It doesn't mean to say I'll be right, by the way. But this is what we're talking about. But I think on this cast we've given him a lot of time. I think in 2 years he should have shown a bit of something. But
I'll put this to you, Macca. About Fisher Mackesy. If we took him at number 35, would anyone give a shit that he's taking a little longer to get up to speed?
No, they wouldn't.
And that's the emotive point. It's the fact. It's not that he's on our list, but it's the fact that we took him at 6. Now, it's not his fault that we took him at 6, because he is who he is. And this is where people get hung up on the number, the draft pick, right? We took Mackesy for whatever reason. We thought he was the best, tall defender in the thing at the time and all the rest of it. But the simple fact is that he will develop at the rate that he develops. Now, if he was at 35, we'd be quite happy to let him slow burn in the SANFL and come up to speed, But because we took him at 6, he should be already, a stand-up. Not all players develop at the same rate. We've got Geordie Butts, who's come on and done a really good job. We've got Fisher Mackesy that maybe needs a little bit longer. Geordie Butts was a bloody rookie pick.
He's a rookie. And the thing on that is that these comments are always directed at the players. You are this particular pick. You should be playing better. They didn't pick themselves. They didn't say that's where they deserve to be. That was the club who thought that's where that player is for our needs. And any of the discussion that anybody has on it actually needs to aim that at the club and not at the player, because the player is only doing what they are able to within their own sphere of development, because you don't know what's going on within the club in terms of developments, or if they get injuries, etc. So like Ben Davis, the massive amount of injuries we talk about, like he's been on our list for 6-7 years. We really ideally actually only had him on our list for 3 years because he's had knee reconstructions, full year out. Yeah. And that's what happens in sport and everything else. Yeah. And to me, I think that builds a lot of pressure on these younger players as well, and where we need to take a bit of a step back.
Absolutely. And bringing it back to the grand final, and the focus on coaches and all the rest of it. Matt, when was the last time a club won a grand final with a shit team?
Well, they don't. They don't.
And that's the point, isn't it? I mean, yes, there's been good teams that have not won grand finals. We didn't win a grand final in 2017. We didn't win, back in whatever it was, 05, 04, 05 or whenever it was, all the way back then when we were Crowbots and all the rest of it. There's never been a club or a team that has won a grand final that has been shit. And my point with that is that yes, the coach can put the finishing touches on and put a strategy in place that's appropriate for his list and get the most out of his players. But at the end of the day, he probably contributes maybe 5 or 10% in my view, and it's on the coaches, on the players, 90% of it, in terms of whether they're successful or not. That's my opinion.
Well, there is one other factor, and it's a very, very important factor, and 2017 proved that. You also have to be very mentally strong as well. And
well, that's support staff's role, isn't it? Really?
Well, it is.
Yeah,
Well,
to help them develop that.
Well, it's to build that up over the course of time. You're quite right. And obviously that, as well as we were coached in many areas in 2017, that was obviously one that we were let down very badly, because we just didn't turn up mentally, did we? So we actually had a good side all year. We showed that in every game up until that particular point.
Yeah.
We were still in that game in the last quarter.
But mentally we weren't, Nikki. That was the problem.
But yeah, you're right. That was then we just couldn't go on with it.
Yeah. And an interesting aside to that, following that game, Don Pike felt that we were mentally weak and he wanted to do something to toughen the players up mentally, and unfortunately listened to the wrong bloke, and Burton talked him into collective minds and he was out. Simon Goodwin a couple of years ago wanted to send Melbourne on a camp of some sort that was of similar nature, not by the same group. The players revolted and said, no, we're not going to go, and Simon was big enough to go, all right, we're going to go down a different path. So, a bit of a Damien Barrett sliding doors moment there, I guess. But in any case, look, back to the game at hand, I just wanted to make that point that I think coaches are there's a time and a place for a coach. Like at the moment, I'm starting to hear a few rumbles about Fagan at Brisbane. So are you kidding me? The job that bloke's done to bring Brisbane back from being a stopover to a decent club for most players to a force to be reckoned with, and barring a couple of key injuries late in the season, it could have very easily been Brisbane instead of the Western Bulldogs in that grand final.
It would have been. They were two key forwards, and when they played the Bulldogs, they were two key forwards short, and they lost the game, I think, by a point. And normality would have said that they would have won that if they'd had those two key forwards in their side. So just bad luck can beat you. No, Fagan's done a great job.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the team that has done it best, or the club that has done its best, is actually Sydney. If you look at the longevity of Sydney's coaches, we had Longmire and then we had Roos prior to that. They have been very good at developing. Like Longmire won't leave until he wants to go. Sydney haven't won a grand final for a few years now, but they won't move Longmire on until he's ready to go. Even to the extent that they were happy to let Stewie Jew go because there was no succession plan. And you compare that to Collingwood, who decided, or Hawthorn. Hawthorn probably not so much because Clark had been there for ages, but Collingwood, which decided that Mick Malthouse, after a couple of years after winning a premiership, was no longer the man, and set a succession plan up. It's just crazy times, and they haven't had any success since.
That was Eddie. Yeah, that was just mad. It was absolute madness, quite frankly. It was just Eddie's obsession. Really, that he wanted Buckley as a coach. It made no sense. It made no sense at all. And they paid the price for it.
Yeah. So anyway, all right, let's move on to some individuals, shall we? Because there were some standout performers. Obviously, Petrarca now For one moment during the game, he had the highest possessions ever in the grand final, but for whatever reason, they've ticked it back to 39. I don't know whether there was a statistician error or whatever, but nevertheless, 39 touches, 21 kicks, 18 handballs, 24 contested possessions, if you don't mind, and a disposal efficiency of 74%. Just probably the best grand final performance I reckon I've seen that I can remember.
I'll support that. This is a guy who I think he was taken number 1 in his year, wasn't he? And
number two, wasn't he?
number 2.
McCartan won that year.
Oh, there, strange that. Yeah, well, Petrarca has been criticised up until the last 2 years for not performing up to his ability, and the criticism was justified. He's got himself last year. He got himself fit, and he started becoming an extremely good player. And this year, he's got himself even fitter, stronger, and his endurance was fantastic in the grand final. I mean, I can't think of any weakness in his game that you could identify on the way he played in the grand final. And what bigger place can you play your game than in a grand final, and just to play the near perfect game? Outstanding.
Yep. And here's where stats can sometimes lie at you, because whilst Caleb Daniel wasn't bad, his 37 touches, 26 kicks, 11 handballs at 68% with 10 contested possessions paled into significance. By comparison, in terms of the level of impact he had on the game and the importance he had on the game. Whereas in the previous week, Daniel was instrumental because he was able to actually be constructive with his disposal. This week, Melbourne were able to shut down all the outlets, and whilst Caleb still got a lot of the ball, he wasn't anywhere near as damaging because he didn't have the targets.
No doubt about that. I did think Daniel did try very, very hard, though, and I actually, in the end, I rated him as their best player.
He tried hard, but he made stupid decisions.
Yeah, and I think that was down to the pressure, Nick.
Yep, and he did not cope with that pressure. And where he was and his turnovers were incredibly detrimental against the Bulldogs. Just on Petrarca, I remember a couple of weeks ago when we were discussing a Melbourne game, and we were talking Oliver versus Petrarca, and you guys were on the bandwagon for Oliver, and I was on the bandwagon for Petrarca, so I'm just going to go, hello. There's just something about the way he plays.
Pretty sure I called it a toss-up. I reckon Oliver's a better player, but I really love watching Petrarca play.
Yeah, it's just, to me, it's just so fluid. And just the way he plays the game, that's what you want to go and see. And I do have to give a shout out to a couple of guys in the chat, because I think we're going to pull you up that, Dusty's had some pretty fair performances in the grand final, and I think Darren Jarman's had a pretty good one as well.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a sec. Clayton Oliver, 33 disposals, 14 and 19, 13 contested possessions. But I think you're right. I think he actually went to Bontempelli, didn't he?
He did.
Bit, and probably sacrificed himself a little bit to quieten the Bont down. But still an excellent game by Oliver. Salem as well, half back and through the middle, 27 touches, 22 and 5. Was really good. He's a really good link player and a really good distributor for them, and I thought he was excellent. Treloar, I thought, was pretty good. 27 touches for the Bulldogs, 11 and 16, particularly in that second quarter. I thought he was excellent. McRae got a bit of the ball, but I didn't think he was terribly damaging. 26 touches, 12 and 14. Bailey Smith, again, I felt apart from Bontempelli, I felt like the Bulldogs midfielders, or their prime movers, got a lot of ball in areas that didn't put Melbourne under pressure. I feel like Melbourne were very good at keeping their prime movers away from dangerous parts of the ground.
Well, if you think about most of the attacks of the Bulldogs, there weren't too many that went straight from centre, straight down to goals. Yeah. They were generally going wide and around flanks and doing it the hard way. And, if you haven't got any winners up forward, well, that's not going to get you many goals.
Yeah. Jack Viney, I thought was good. 25 disposals, very inside. 14 contested possessions, 16 handballs out of those 25 touches. Gus Brayshaw, I've talked about. 25 touches on a wing was excellent, with 11 contested possessions. And then, Bontempelli, a pretty damaging 25 touch game with 3 goals, 13 and 12. Surprisingly, Bontempelli only spent 68% time disposal efficiency. Sorry, I thought he was pretty clean, but under 70, it actually surprises me a little bit. And then, the other midfielder for the Bulldogs, Liberatore, 23 touches, 10 and 13. 15 contested possessions. I thought he was good in tight early. No one else there really of note. A couple of quiet ones. Lockie Hunter didn't have a huge impact in the second half, I didn't think. Alex Keith, I thought, had a bit of a stinker, to be honest with you.
Ordinary.
Johansson didn't have much influence at all.
He did for a little bit when they were having that run on. He was getting a lot of that. It was back to their last premiership where he was just getting that run off of half back. But once that ball just started going over his head, etc., just didn't help.
Yeah. Cody Waitman was extremely disappointing. You have to ask whether he was actually fit. But let's just go back up to...
that hit on the goalpost.
Sorry, you broke up there.
He hit the goalpost and then he hit his head on the ground.
No, that was Johansson.
That was Waitman. He hit the goalpost and then when he came down, his head actually hit the ground. And I was like, why did they not take him off and check him?
Well, he hadn't touched the ball at half time. 0 touches.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So let's just talk about Fitch for a minute. 6 goals, 2, 13 disposals. There's how close was that to D. Jarman in '97?
Well, Fitch, not the same league.
Why?
Just the class of Jarman. I mean, just Jarman.
Doesn't matter. It's 6 goals. It's like golf. It doesn't matter how you score them.
Yeah, it's 6 goals, but Jarman was starting in the midfield for every single one of those, and then he went down forward. Fitch is only playing up forward.
They're not necessarily that all of them, Nicky, but he also played as a midfielder, and some of his stuff was really classy. Fitch, at least 3 of his goals were just presence on his chest, and he admittedly he's got to kick them.
But he also has to lead to the right spots and everything else. So forward craft is a whole other thing too.
Hey, D. Jarman got 2 lace outs, one from Kane Johnson and one from Kimmy Costa on the left, which Jars said is the only time Costa's kicked on his left for his entire career. He got one soft holding free. Got one soft holding free, and one decent snap where the ball bounced back into his lap, and I've watched that about 10,000 times, and I still can't work out how the ball just ended up in Jarman's arm. So, I don't know.
That bounce.
Hang on. Vardy Magic makes a huge point. Jarman was the difference. Fitch was just the cream.
That's what I was waiting for. Waiting for. You could argue as much as you like, but I don't think Melbourne were relying on Fitch to kick 6. Whereas we didn't have a lot up forward. Don't forget, we'd lost Modra, etc. So we didn't have that focal point. We were struggling to find avenues to goal, and it required D. Jarman to work his magic. Malcolm Blight asked him to work his magic, and he delivered. And that's the key difference. So all these scribes saying, best since Jarman, same as Jarman, it's not in the same ballpark. Not because kicking 6 in a grand final isn't a fantastic effort, but just the context of the game.
The context of the game is the thing, isn't it?
I mean, he had a bloody good game and everything else, but if it wasn't him, it would have been one of the other Melbourne forwards.
Yeah.
Because of the way that they play. And he missed shots and the others missed shots as well. It's just you're right, and Vardy Magic was absolutely spot on. Is that it's the way it makes that difference. I mean, it is absolutely no slight against Fritsch because he did have a great game.
Yep.
But Darren Jarman is a freak.
Yep. Yep. And did a bit else too, apart from that. All right. So that winds it up. That's the grand final done and done. And
Yep.
I guess the only thing to ask is, out of, I guess, the top four, Port, Geelong, the Bulldogs and Melbourne, do we think those teams are the teams to beat next year?
You go first, Nick.
Two of them, I think, yes. A third, they'll probably do what they've normally done, which is play well during the season, but I think they'll still struggle once it actually gets to the final. And the fourth one, no, because there's been quite a few exodus happening down there, which is very interesting.
You can put names on them, Nicky?
Melbourne Bulldogs. Although it'll be, I put a little question marks next to the Bulldogs on this because of the way that they were beaten. It'll be interesting to see how they turn up next year. Port will be the one that will play well during the season, but will falter in finals. And Geelong, I think, although we've predicted this for so bloody long and they still keep bloody winning because it's down at Cardinia Park, but there's been some very interesting movements out of Geelong since what's happened. So
Matty Scarlett was the interesting one.
Yeah, we might finally see the slide.
Yeah, the way I see it, I think Melbourne obviously they've got a very good team all round, and it's not an old team, so I can't see any reason why they won't be there again next year. I think the Bulldogs are pretty similar. I think they've got some quality players there. I don't know about winning a flag, but I think they'll be up and around the place. Geelong, it doesn't matter if they're up and around the place because they'll never win a flag with that game plan. They will never, ever win a game, that game plan. And their players are getting older. I think their window is shut well and truly. I think Port Adelaide, the shutters are slowly coming down. Next year is if they don't...
Really?
Yes, I think when you look at the number of players they've got over 30, I think they've got 10.
Yeah, but they've also got 30. A very good young crop as well.
We've got some nice ones coming through, but you need you need that lovely balance of some seniors, some mid-levels, and some juniors there. And I just think Port aren't totally balanced in terms of their list. But I think, I am with the other supporters of the other 17 teams that say, in Ken we trust, because you'll never win a bloody flag, I'm sure of it.
Well, there's a couple of noticeables I forgot to mention in the Melbourne support staff. A lot of people saying Choco Williams was instrumental, and I'm sure that he played a role, and certainly had a chat to a couple of the boys apparently during the course of that third quarter or half time, and Petrarca was one of them. But the other one I thought was interesting, and I'd forgotten that he was part of that group, is Alan Richardson, because you remember the last time Port Adelaide were competitive, Alan Richardson was the coach, was the assistant coach, senior assistant there. And he ended up going to St Kilda and not having any success there, and was probably one of those coaches that falls into the category of didn't get long enough. But Ken Hinkley works best when he's got a general next to him. Alan Richardson, Phil Walsh. I wouldn't call Michael Voss a general, but he's been, probably the most recent, along with Jared Schofield. Ken's got no one around him next year, and I think that's going to be the biggest problem for Port. I don't think it's actually the playing group. I think it's the coaching staff. Yep,
I agree with that.
Yep.
I think it's mostly that, but there is that little bit of the point from Macca, and we've identified this before, that they've got that great group of young kids and they've got those older veterans, but it's that depth, that just slightly older ones that are supposed to come in, that's where they're lacking. And if they get injuries, etc., that's where the problem comes into.
Yeah. Now, I've been carrying on like a dickhead, but don't forget, people in the audience, you've got a few minutes yet, so if you want to have something to say, jump on now. It's the last weekend wrap for the season, so we'll still have a few Tuesday Night Lives, but We won't be around on Sunday night anymore after this week, so get it off your chest now if you've got anything to say. Let's turn our thoughts briefly, Macca, to what's happening in the off season. Of course, as covered on Tuesday night, we've got the young lad from Sydney coming in. Hopefully, if they can get a deal done, which you'd think they'd be able to. What sort of a difference do you see him making, Mac and Nick?
I watch him every week. I watch every game every week, and this guy is quality. He is absolute quality. Last year he really emerged last year, and I thought I think he finished about 10th in their best and fairest last year.
I think it was a bit higher than that. I think it was like 8 or 7 or something. But anyway, yeah.
It might have been, yes, it was. And absolutely deserved it. I thought, gee, he's a quality player. I'd love to get him. I actually thought that last year. And then watching him this year, he went up to another level. He was playing off at half back originally, and he's a very strong overhead mark. He's good at ground level. He's got reasonably good pace. He's a beautiful left foot kick. He reads the play beautifully. He's got good vision around the ground. There are no weaknesses in this boy. And then they moved him onto the wing. And once they moved him on the wing, Sydney started winning more games because he's got that lovely left foot pass coming in there, and he's got good vision, and he knows how to earn a ball. So I think he's one of the best recruits we've had for many, many a long day.
Nick?
Many, many a long day.
For me, there's all of that, but it's the contested marking and that, the great marking ability that he's got, because I think that's where we've kind of lacked with some of our forwards, and that's we just need those kind of players who do hit that kind of words gone elsewhere. So I think he's an absolute must-have. Whoever did, to get him to pick us, well done, very well done. I think this is a great move from the club, and the fact that we've got a pre-season draft pick that we can use, so it's then up to make sure that we don't give away too much, but to still try and be fair.
Yeah.
The other thing which is very important to note about this is that Sydney tried to hold him. Port tried to put their nose in, at least did some tire kicking, but he chose Adelaide. And I think that is so important that, the media have been trying to build Port Adelaide up as the South Australian club, the destination club, the bloody everything club. And even on the day before it was announced that Dawson was going to come to Adelaide, I watched the gurus from the AFL talking about how Dawson will be very good for Port Adelaide and what will Port Adelaide have to give up. Didn't even consider that Adelaide might be in the hunt. Well, in future, they'll start to, because he has chosen us, and he's, in my opinion, going to be an elite player, they will have to think of Adelaide, and they won't have to write us off. It's very important for us in terms of our status in the AFL.
I guess so. By all reports, we're into Jordan a long way out. You would have thought that he would have been exposed to Matty Nicks a fair bit in New South Wales. Matty Nicks also has a Sydney Swans connection, obviously having played there. He was obviously targeted by all reports from the beginning of the year. I didn't ever really think there was a problem. I just had to laugh at that numbnut bloody Chris Davies from Port Adelaide, who's the biggest tool I've ever seen, just try to get around it and all the rest of it. And the biggest indicator for me, Macca, was that he never had a physical never had a medical at Port. And I knew he'd had a medical. I knew he'd had a medical with us, and once that became clear, it's like, well, that's like all the rest is just media bullshit, and that's what it turned out to be. So I wouldn't mind betting that we don't spend a lot of time haggling with Sydney. Pete and I in the past and I'd be interested, Macca and Nick, in your thoughts. Pete and I have sort of been spinning the wheels on a pick downgrade, 4 for Dawson and 12. But the more I think about it, I think probably 23 is the centrepiece of that trade, and maybe a few stake knives one way or the other in terms of picks or future picks or whatever. What do you think?
I think that's 100% right. Pick 23 will be the staple part of it, and they'll say that 23 is not good enough, and so we'll do a couple of pick swaps here and there, but it might be future swaps or whatever. But at the end of the day, we won't be parting with pick 4, I don't think.
No, and I think it will also wait a little bit as well on what other players are possibly also available around, and if we've got any other little, pokers in the fire. And so I think we're actually coming from a nice position of strength regarding Dawson because he is out of contract.
Razor, I don't know what space you're talking about. We're talking about a trade here, so space isn't really an issue. In terms of if you're talking about space on the list, well, we have to have a minimum amount of players on the list, so that doesn't really matter. In terms of cap space, we've got plenty of money coming off the books.
Yeah, he's talking, but remember, we have to spend that. We have to spend a certain amount of that.
95% of our TPP we have to spend. So, salary cap isn't our problem at the moment. So,
no.
A little bit of talk about Isaac Rankin, just a little bit of talk about Isaac Rankin. I think it's more speculation than anything else, but it is notable that Isaac's in town at the moment and has let everyone know that he's in town via Instagram. So who knows about that?
Well, do we really want him?
Oh, absolutely. We'd take him in a heartbeat. Macca, come on.
We need a quality small forward.
Well, the player that played before he went up to the Gold Coast and played in his first couple of games of the Gold Coast is a player I would like, but the player that played for the Gold Coast this year I wouldn't be too interested in.
You don't lose talent, Macca.
Yeah, and that comes back to our discussion we had earlier, Macca, about judging too quickly, because is that to do with what's going on up at Gold Coast? The way that the balls come in up there. There could be other things that are going on in terms of coaching structure. There could be other things that kind of impact that, because it is really only one season, really, that he's kind of started to stink it up a bit.
Yeah, and Farty Magic on the chat trying to just inject a little bit of logic and rationalism into the thing by saying that Will Day's here as well. It doesn't mean anything. Look, we all know that. Just let us have a little bit of fun. Yeah, I'd take Isaac. I don't know what it'd take. I think his form in the last 12 months has probably only dictated the fact that he's no longer worth a first round pick, Mac. But you don't lose talent.
Well, look, I would give a second rounder for him, and that'd be it. But if we were talking first round, not interested.
Oh no. No, he's fallen off that. Luco also in town, apparently having lunch with the Port boys, but of course he's got connections there with Connor Rozee, etc.
Yeah, they're all friends.
So I don't think Luco's coming back. And look, the problem with Isaac is that he's still under contract. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's a next year thing.
Luco will be coming back next year if it's not this year. I'm pretty sure of that thing. He has bought a house here.
It's because this is his hometown.
Yes, but if he's going to stay in Brisbane for the next 10 years, he's not going to buy a house here now.
Why, you never heard of renting a place out?
Well, I have heard of that, but generally, put it this way, in the football
Daniel Talia owned 3 houses in Melbourne. He didn't want to leave.
Well, okay, fair enough. But I just think that there might be a sign that maybe not this year, but I do think next year he'll be gettable.
Well, I think both. I'm not disagreeing with you. I don't think it'll be this year, though, and I don't think the house is any indication. They're born and bred Western Suburbs people, the Lukosiuses, and I don't think it means a hell of a lot. But I do agree with you that both the time to get Lukosius and Rankin will be next year, but I'll put this to you. Do we still need Lukosius?
Well, I know we had this debate last week. He's not He's not a must get. I do agree with that.
He'll cost you too much, Mac. I reckon. It costs you too much.
I would like to have him in the side. He's not a must get, but he's going to develop he's developed into a pretty nice player at the moment. A pretty nice player. I think there's still more development in him, and he could develop into a very good player. But
where though?
Beg pardon?
In what?
And I know what you're going to say. Well, I was going to say in defence, a running defence type player. But you could even play him on the wing. But look, he'd be a good addition to the team. But I can't maintain that he's an essential player for the team.
I think you always want good players in your team, and I think there's a future for Luko on a wing or even as a high half forward. My problem, I think, in the whole equation is that he's going to cost too much for what he brings. I wouldn't want the club to spend a first round pick, which is what it's going to take to get him back here, if he's not a gilt edge midfielder or a first choice key position forward. And unfortunately, that's how. See, and he was drafted as a future key position forward, Macca, and it hasn't panned out. He hasn't really grown. He's more good playing behind the ball, it seems. So I don't really think that. I know the Lukosius family would love him to play at the Crows, but I can't see it happening. Whereas Isaac Rankin, even though he's definitely lesser performed of the two, we all know what his talent is. You don't lose talent, and he actually possesses abilities in a position that we lack at the moment. Rowe isn't going to cut it as a small forward. Murphy doesn't cut it as a small forward. Tarek Newchurch is a year or two away at least of even being a sniff of being a small forward, in my opinion. So Isaac feels a definite need, and he comes at a cheaper cost. He's probably, a high to mid second rounder now, whereas he was, a top end first rounder. So I think that's probably the basis of my thoughts on that one.
Well, there's no doubt that you should always be drafting or trading for needs only, in the sense that just not for the sake of getting a nice player. So that supports your argument in terms of Lukosius, but it does support your argument in terms of Rankin. But I'd be very, very happy to have Rankin if the Rankin the very best Rankin came here, and maybe it might be that he has been just sort of, I don't know, not putting in as much as he should have been. And I don't know whether there's any underlying issues or not, but he had a pretty terrible year this year, Pete.
Terrible. He did, but he didn't have a bad first year for a first year player. And
no, good.
As I said, you don't lose your talent, and we all know that there are systemic issues at Gold Coast. The amount of players that have left that club, the amount of players that have struggled at that club because of the location and the lack of being AFL heartland, and succession of coaches and all that sort of rubbish. I don't think you can necessarily. Sorry.
Another question. Rumours that we've been trying to get pick 3. I don't understand it. Can you enlighten me on that one?
It's more. I think it is just a rumour. Gold Coast have been on the record for a while that they're willing to pick exchange pick 3 for a quality forward. There's been talk about us giving them 4 and Himmelberg for 3. But I don't know. I've heard nothing concrete about it. But that's the basis.
Well, if that were to be the case, that would mean that we're obviously targeting somebody who we think is definitely going to be at 3.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea who that?
Or maybe getting ahead of someone who might otherwise fall to Gold Coast, or maybe making it part of an offer to North Melbourne that's more attractive than 4.
Well, I'm trying. I don't know enough of the the trade targets in the sense of all of them. Somebody in the chat said Finn Callaghan, and he probably seems to be outside the magic one, the best midfielder to get. Would that be the target?
Well, it could be. There's been a lot of talk about Callaghan having a connection with Beveridge and being a bit of a flight risk, which may steer, he may be tanking his draft interviews or what have you. I don't know. There's been a tiny little bit of talk about North maybe not looking for a midfielder this year, although if they'd pass on Jason Horne-Francis, then I don't know whether you've seen his 2 finals, Macca, but if ever there was a gilt edge pick 1, including Riley Thilthorpe last year, if ever there was a gilt edge pick 1, it's Jason Horne-Francis. For an 18-year-old kid to play like that in a SANFL final series against men, and to be honest with you, South Adelaide were relying on their kids. Horne-Francis, Matty Roberts, Sampson, the other one, Schultz, relying on their kids to get them over the line, and for Jason to have such an influence not only in the game this weekend but also the previous weekend. He's a ready-made round 1 player next year.
I think he's the best number 1 I've seen for many, many years. I watched him in the Snaffle, and I was just what a player! He's just and I said in our private chat about the fact, to me, there's a little bit of Ablettesque about him. Some of his things he does are like Ablett. I can remember 2 instances, for example, and Ablett used to do this, like the ball's at your feet, there's a player running at you. Rather than trying to stand up and do something, in that crouching position, he's managed to spot somebody on his left-hand side, 20 metres away, and pass it across there from that crouching position. And he also kicked a goal on a semi-crouching position as well, from about 30, 40 metres out. He is a complete player. He can mark overhead. His reflexes are lightning. When you watch him in a pack, he is one of those players that are very, very rare. You see a lot of players around a pack, they might be on one side of the pack, and when the ball goes to the other side of the pack, well, they leave it to the other people on the other side of the pack. Ablett would never used to do that. Ablett would actually just watch that ball like a hawk and watch for one opportunity and swoop and get it, even no matter what side it was on. And this is what Horne-Francis does. I've seen him before and thought he was good. I saw him this week, and I just think, shit, we're not getting him.
So, Macca, during the season on this bloody show, when I was crying because we beat Hawthorn,
I'm with you.
I was crying. Now you understand why I was crying. Because my goodness me, if ever there was a player to just cap off your midfield and play anywhere basically, it's Jason Horne-Francis.
Yeah.
I don't know how many drafts you'd have to go back to get a number 1 that's got the quality of this kid. He is something special.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it was Fane, you and I was it last year or the year before, we actually described him as a mix between Ablett and Dangerfield.
Yep.
In terms of he's got Ablett skills, but the Dangerfield burst.
Oh, he has. He just has. Oh, Jesus. I said to Mrs. Macca, I can't say the language I used, but I did speak about the Hawthorn win.
You don't swear at Mrs. Macca, do you?
I swear in front of her, not at her.
Right, good.
I would never swear at her. But
You could probably swear better back.
she's pretty good. Only an odd one here and there, and when I'm in the shit.
Anyway, look, it's not worth spending time on because we're not getting Jason, unfortunately, and that's just the way it is. So, but Melbourne tanked a couple of years ago, and it didn't seem to hurt their culture any, and they got a nice ruckman out of it. So anyway, so look. Moving ahead, the only other news that we know of at the moment is Tommy Lynch looks like he's heading to North. Not sure whether it's in a player or coaching capacity, probably a bit of both. So good to see Tommy land somewhere. Haven't really heard any more from about Talia. Whispers both about Richmond, although that seems to have cooled, and Essendon due to his connection probably with Truck. So we'll see how that turns out. But not much else going on. A couple more signings. We had the young lads get signed, Parnell and Newchurch and the other one that I can't think of.
Borlase. Yeah,
So only a couple left to sign now, O'Connor and Davis. And they'll probably leave that until after the trade period when they've got a better idea of how the list looks. Yeah, so very interesting off-season coming up.
Yeah, they're going to be flexible, those two. That I think one of them has to go, Fiend, because
it's looking the way that way, isn't it?
Yeah, I think one of them's going to have to go. And I think it depends on opportunities. It might be both go. But I would be pretty positive one of them will go, and I was saying if an opportunity comes up that with another club of another player, well then it might mean they both have to go. And I think that I think our club's done very, very well in who it's selected to keep. If you were going to narrow it down to two players to be in this position, I think these are the two players. It doesn't mean that they're absolute failures or anything like that, but you do have to turn players over, and you do have to get new players into the club, and so like these may well be the two. Question I was going to ask you though is that in terms of Kelly, what would you think we might get in compensation for Kelly, and if Lynch and Talia do go to clubs, what would we be likely to get there?
Well, Lynch is going to go on the rookie list, so that means that he will be we won't get anything for Tommy.
I thought that might be the case, yeah.
Yeah, and you'd think the same would happen with Tiles.
Right.
I reckon Kelly would get the same as what we got for Rat.
Well, I wouldn't be upset with that.
Yeah, a third rounder. I think we got Rat went up there on 5 years at. No, what did he go up there? 5 years at 400 or something. Which was a band 5, which is third round, I think. 1, 2, 3, a band 4, third rounder.
Right.
I reckon that's what we get. I reckon that's what we get for him.
Okay. So I just wonder whether that might come into play with the trade for Dawson, that's all.
Look, maybe. I'm not aware of if Sydney. I don't think Sydney need points for anything in particular this year. You would, yeah. And it's an interesting one because if you're looking at it from Sydney's point of view, they're losing a young player. You would think that they would want a young player in return, but we don't really have anything in that department to give them. Not that we'd want to, and as Nikki pointed out earlier, we do have a little bit of leverage in terms of the pre-season draft, although I don't think we'd be prone to use that. So look, it might do, Mac. I'm not sure. We got to probably take our. I don't even think we. I think we may only pick up 2 in the draft this year. I think we might upgrade a rookie and take 2 in the draft.
Well, you could well be right because of the fact that we still have 2 key players sitting on our rookie list, and one's a fullback, of course, and one's Keys. And
well, if we don't, oh, and we've got Strawny as well, and I think we run into a bit of trouble if we don't upgrade one of those, because then we're going to have to do 2 rookie upgrades next year because of the limitation on how long a player can stay on the rookie list. But that's what makes me think we're going to upgrade one of them, either Butts or Strawn. Probably Butts, I'd say.
Yeah.
And take 2 at the draft. That's what I think.
Yeah, and the other thing that's actually changed is this year is that, or was that already changed this year, where Borlase and Newchurch could previously only play if they got upgraded onto a rookie list, but now the Category B players can play directly as well.
I'm not sure about that, Macca.
Well, I know they can. I'm not sure whether that was the case, but I think I read it as a new rule that they can. They definitely will be able to be chosen anyhow. That way.
Yeah. Look, it's lots to play out. I think we might dip into our picks for 2022 at some stage to try and get up. I would see the trouble with the Jordan Dawson trade is that it means that our 23rd, which we may have tried to push up into the first round, like the back end of the first round, is gone. So our ability to get any more first round picks is limited to our willingness to split pick 4. There's been talk about us splitting our pick 4 with Richmond for 7, and I think they've got 16 from memory.
It's around about that. It's around about that, yeah.
So there's been talk, but to me that's too much of a cost. That's not enough back for pick 4. Yes, it's 2 first round picks, but pick 4 is gilt edged. 7 to 20 it's starting to, particularly in this draft, it's very even after 7. Pete and I have talked before about the fact that if we split 4 and got Dawson and 12, then 12 puts us in the frame for a lad like Arlo Draper, who wouldn't be a bad get. I don't think Matty Roberts goes that high. He would have probably been in the frame late first round, I think, or early second. So I think there's a fair bit to play out in terms of pick swapping this year, Macca, before we have a real read on what we're going to take to the draft.
Yeah, I think you're right. One good thing is, even if we don't do anything special, we at least have got Dawson, which is a quality add to and we've got all our good players still intact. So if we do nothing else, it's a very good game.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, I think we've pretty much done that to death. I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who's joined us throughout, not only tonight but throughout the season, on YouTube and also on Discord. Our Discord community has grown substantially this year. Our YouTube subscriptions are growing pretty well as well compared to where we started this year. It's been great to be able to talk footy with everyone on a Sunday night, I should say, every weekend. And it's been fantastic to spend another year with my offsiders, Nikki and Macca, at various stages. Despite people in the chat, Macca, thinking that, we're at each other's throats all the time, we're really not.
Not all the time.
Not all the time.
There was a pause there. You had to think about it. It's half the fun.
It is.
It's half the fun.
No, look, I think the good thing is if we just sat in and agreed all the time, it wouldn't be much fun, really. It just would be pretty boring. So an argument now and again is a good thing.
Yep, absolutely. We will continue on Tuesday nights for the time being. I reckon Pete and I might do, this Tuesday, and then we might just leave it for a couple of weeks, depending on, I haven't looked at the dates for trade week and all that sort of stuff yet, but we'll obviously be back around trade week and then into the draft. But we might have a little break after this Tuesday until that comes up. But look, from everyone at Crowcast, I can't thank enough the people that have supported us on Patreon. the people that have got around our community on Discord, on YouTube. Make sure you continue to tell your mates about our YouTube channel. We're sort of creeping up there. I'd love to get it to 1,000 subs by sometime next year, so we can start getting a bit of a community going around our YouTube channel as well. Lots of things planned, of course. Half of them probably won't happen because I always run out of time. My ambitions are greater than my abilities, Macca, but that's what my first 2 wives said as well.
You've been married 3 times, mate.
Twice.
Oh, you're counting the current one.
I haven't got a current one.
Has a partner.
I've got a partner, but yeah, none of this wife bullshit. Anyway. All right, look, so from everyone at Crowcastle Weekend Wrap, thank you, everyone, and we will see you at some stage in 2022. And until then, we'll talk to most of you on Tuesday night. Good night, guys.
Yeah. Good night, all.
Night all.